You gonna start it? Oh.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the season finale of our St. Louis Battlehawks post-game show, as the Battlehawks have been eliminated from postseason play, as the Seattle Dragons have defeated the Vegas Vipers. What even was the final score? Like 28-9. All I know is that the point gap was big enough for Seattle to win that fifth tiebreaker, the fourth tiebreaker. And so now they're in over St. Louis, as both Seattle and St. Louis were 7-3, and a bunch of other tiebreakers had already been negated, essentially. So, yeah, St. Louis is out. Honestly, it was confusing as hell. Like it seemed like nobody even watching knew what the hell the tiebreaker even was, because, okay, everyone knew that if Seattle lost, then nothing would have mattered and St. Louis would have made it. But then even the commentators were like back and forth, like, oh, Seattle has to score 34. Oh, wait, they only have to score 27. It's 28-9, but somehow they still have enough points to make it. And then if they win, then there's like a ranking fifth tiebreaker that no one actually knows how it works. And it's like, the XFL screwed up here, because we could have been in a situation where everyone's just sitting around waiting for the league to announce who made the playoffs. And that is just ridiculously stupid. So I want to start with that. Not the fact that the St. Louis Battlehawks missed the playoffs, but the fact that these rules are so stupid.
Well, I think what you should have done is, like, they should have looked at this last week, and maybe it would have been a bad look, but I don't think it would have been, and made an executive decision to be like, hey, they both make it. Because looking at it, Houston played Arlington earlier today. I didn't watch it. I watched the Maulers and Generals game.
You were watching high school football.
I didn't watch the Houston and Dallas game, but Houston beat them, and that's the playoff game next week, Houston and Dallas in Houston. And Arlington is 4-6. And they don't deserve to be there. So I remember last year with the USFL, to keep the last game of the year competitive between the two worst teams, they said, hey, whoever wins this, not loses, gets the first overall pick. So they completely changed how the draft worked.
Yeah, and that was they announced that like the day or two before the game.
Yeah. So why couldn't the XFL just say, like, hey,
fuck divisions. We're just four best teams make the playoffs.
That's what it should have been. There should never be divisions in an 8-team league. This is stupid.
I understand why they have the divisions just based on regionally, because with only 10 games and you can't play everyone an even amount of times. So it makes sense to play your regional opponents more just due to travel cost. But the four best teams are very clearly DC, Houston, St. Louis, and Seattle. So let the four best teams play out the playoffs. And especially for a startup league like this, it might be a bad idea to pull the rug out from under Arlington. But Arlington's not going to do anything. They suck. They don't deserve.
And even if they do anything, do you really want a 4-6 team in the championship game? And if they win it, you're just a team with a below 500 record just won the championship. What the fuck are we doing?
Yeah, give Houston let's have a Houston and St. Louis matchup, and then a Seattle and DC matchup, and those matchups would actually be visually entertaining, which is what your goal should be here. If you have a championship where you can argue that the best team can't win, that's dumb.
Mm-hmm.
They were hyping up this championship in San Antonio so much, it might suck. If by some miracle it's Arlington,
and then it's just smart for the Battlehawks to get more games because they're the bell cow of the league. They're going to be making the most money.
Oh yeah, I was fully of the belief that they were going to rig the last few games so that the Battlehawks would at least host a playoff game just for another 30,000 seat game.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not going to get that in DC or Houston. You really needed the battle. I remember in this very first episode, we said that in order for the league to survive, we needed a St. Louis and San Antonio championship game, and neither of those teams made the playoffs.
Nope.
And I'll stand by the fact that if Orlando was good, Orlando would have had pretty good attendance, but they were they might be the worst spring football team to ever exist. There's not a lot of guys that are like well-versed on that topic. I am. They are god-awful. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a worse football team put together than the Orlando Guardians. Like, they are bad.
I mean, they got blown out every single game, besides somehow beating DC.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was wild.
I think it's very clear that DC is going to win it. I feel like if I had to choose who I want to win it at this point, Houston, I guess. Or Houston or DC. Like, let Te'amu get his ring.
Mhm.
But, like, really, like, no winner at this point helps the league.
No.
Like, they...
I mean, DC's attendance did go up by every week. Like, I remember they sold out a game a couple weeks ago, and like they started off the year with only like 10,000 fans. So it's growth for the league, and they're getting more ticket sales than what they started off which is good. But it's still only half of what St. Louis was bringing in.
Oh yeah, like you needed St. Louis and San Antonio to succeed, and you real for as much as y'all talk about his baby Brahmas, like San Antonio was.
It is a real thing. I don't know why you ignore that. It's a real thing. The Rock, it's his baby Brahmas. He favors them.
Josh, do you have anything else to add about like the season recap? Because I think I don't know. I'm ready to talk about Becht.
Well, we will. I definitely felt like we should have spent the first portion though, just kind of bitching about these rules because it really is ridiculous how, like you said, Arlington gets to be in, but St. Louis doesn't, even though St. Louis is a much better team and would have provided a much better playoff game. I mean, a playoff game in the Dome. Think about that. We're not even going to get that. We're not going to get to see St. Louis in the playoffs.
I mean, they probably could have opened even more tickets in the 400s.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a playoff game. St. Louis realized that they would have realized that had they been in the playoffs, and I think they would have showed up. I guess we should just move on to talking about like Anthony Becht and like the team and the way they played down the stretch of the season, because we did neglect doing a post game for several weeks and a lot of things happened. So they beat the Roughnecks. All right. So they lost the second DC game, which that you had to have that one, man. That second DC game, that was at home in front of your home crowd. We all said like,
we were there.
Yeah, get DC in the next one.
Hold on, Josh. I think it's worth mentioning because I remember me and Connor talked about this before. The Battlehawks never had a home game overlap with a Cardinals home game on the weekend, which is obviously a really good thing. And I just looked at the Cardinals schedule. They're out of town for basically the rest of the entire XFL season. So it's even more infuriating that the Battlehawks aren't getting a home game, because there would literally be nothing else for there to do in St. Louis, because the blue season's over and the new soccer team's pretty far out. So that wouldn't really even impact traffic. And that stadium only holds, I think it's like 16 to 20,000.
God damn, at least put the championship game in St. Louis.
Yeah, like
they would have shown up for that.
Mm-hmm. Like, there's no reason to not play the championship game in St. Louis. There's no reason to not have just about everything that you can run through St. Louis for this league.
Yeah, so they had to have that second DC game. They didn't get it. They beat the Roughnecks, which was a surprising game in which Anthony Becht actually outcoached Wade Phillips. Really surprising. Then there was the second Seattle game. You had to have that one too. Like that one would have ended.
And they got the shit kicked out of them in that one.
Yeah, and that one would have ended any controversy, and it would have been much easier to determine the playoff seeding or who gets in. You know, what spots were filled. They just kind of collapsed down the stretch, man. Like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, that's kind of what it is. I know it doesn't really feel like that on the surface because the games, it was like a win-loss. So, like, they were always kind of, like, staying afloat. But Yeah, they had to win at least one of the DC games, and they really needed to beat Seattle the second time to kind of.
both of the DC games were early on in the season. And then after that, they went on like a 3 or 4 game win streak until they lost to Seattle. So,
You know why teams collapse down the stretch?
bad coaching.
Ding, 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 ding. I felt like I was watching Mizzou.
Why don't you just go on with Anthony Becht?
No, like, also a bizarre thing that I found is like, all Battlehawks fans are like not. You can't really evaluate them like normal sports fans because.
Can I just no, just stop. Can I just say this? Battlehawks fans, I love you guys. You obviously support the team really well. A lot of you do not know football. I see endless love and support for head coach Anthony Becht. Why? What does Anthony Becht bring to the table as a head coach? He's a great locker room guy. I'll give him that. The players seem to like him. He rallies the troops, that kind of thing. As far as X's and O's, game management, knowing the situation that you're in, he's clueless when it comes to all of that. There were many times this year where Anthony Becht didn't know what he was doing, and the times that the times that things actually ended up working out for the Battlehawks, it wasn't because of his coaching. Like one of the moments that I'm thinking of, I forget who it was against. Maybe it was Vegas or Arlington. It was one of those two, I believe, where there was like 20 seconds left in the half and they had all 3 timeouts, I want to say.
It was
and
Arlington.
And Becht was just running the clock out. And it's like, what are you doing? And they ended up scoring a touchdown. And it made no sense. It worked out, so we didn't talk about it as much. But it made no sense at all. And even then, when the Battlehawks were doing well, Becht showed a complete lack of knowledge for the game and how to manage a game, how to manage the clock, that sort of thing. And I'm sorry, this team was way too talented not to make the playoffs. AJ McCarron was arguably the MVP of this league. I don't know if he would still get it, considering that he missed a game due to injury, but he set the single game passing record. He led the league in passing yards for a bit there, I think, before or up until he got hurt. This team was way too talented. I mean, you have a wide receiver core that is a borderline NFL wide receiver core. I mean, Hakeem Butler was a monster all year long. Austin Prohl was always coming up clutch. Steve Mitchell Jr. was amazing down the stretch. Marcel Aitman was solid. Darius Shepard, who was also the best kick returner in the league. Just a massive group of guys.
And the run game started to figure it out too.
Yeah. And it's like, how do you not make the playoffs with this team? How? And people will say, oh, they went 7-3. It's the rules. The rules were stupid. That's why we didn't get in. And yes, the rules are stupid. And yes, the rules are why you didn't get in. But also, Seattle was playing by the same rules and they got in. So guess what? It falls on Anthony Becht. I'm sorry. This team should have made the playoffs. And I think it's coaching malpractice.
Here's something that I just thought of. We shouldn't have been in a close game with the fucking Vipers. Like that Vipers game came down to the last minute. If we blew out the Vipers like the Sea Dragons did tonight, then we're probably in the playoffs.
Here's another thing to think about.
And we were at home for that game too. And it was really fucking close.
I feel like we can look back at our older episodes where we talked about, like, specifically after the Brahmas one, that is the one that comes to mind, because we just dicked around for 3.5 quarters and then got our shit together at the last second and won it, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like I remember saying that, like, that's unsustainable, and if you keep playing like that, that's going to come back to bite you in the ass. Well, look at where we are. We aren't in the playoffs because of essentially point differential. So if you didn't dick around in all those games and you actually played the level of football that you should be prepared to play, we would not be here right now. We saw after that week how bad San Antonio was, which just makes that game look even worse. And just everything about this team just looks worse and worse in hindsight. Like, if we had a real coach like June Jones, who went undefeated as a head coach with the Roughnecks and is currently the offensive coordinator of, ironically, Seattle. If we had him as a head coach, like with his air raid offense, with AJ McCarron and this great receiving core, we would have scored so goddamn many points we'd be in the playoffs right now, if not undefeated. And it's like, that's not going to happen you don't get that with Becht. And Josh, we were talking about it a while back. because this is being recorded, how do you feel about Beck's talent evaluation? You remember that?
Mhm.
Yeah, so for those that aren't picking up, during the broadcast for the Orlando game,
Also, let's get into the broadcast and how fucking stupid that was. The
well, that's what
broadcast for that fucking game was terrible.
Well, yeah. So first of all, they were talking about Anthony Becht, and they were talking about how many players got cut from the Battlehawks, went to other teams, and actually made like decent contributions. And the broadcast crew was like, "That just speaks to Anthony Becht's talent evaluation." What? That's not how that works. Letting good players to go to other teams does not mean you're a good talent evaluator.
So
Like
fucking-
it was, the broadcast was so fucking bad.
Yeah, because they also they were asking each other who would be the most dangerous in the playoffs, and I don't know why Braden popped out for a second, but anyway, they were also asking each other who would be most dangerous in the playoffs, and both of the broadcast members said the Battlehawks and the Dragons, two teams that we didn't actually know if they would be in the playoffs yet. So
and we weren't.
yeah. And when we should be, and that's the most frustrating part, is we should be in the playoffs. And going back to my Anthony Becht rant, like another reason that they didn't make the playoffs was because they allowed so many points to Orlando that they made it easier for Seattle to make the playoffs because the point differential was worse for St. Louis. And also St. Louis made it worse they made it worse for themselves because off that last Orlando turnover, they came up with 0 points. If they had gotten another touchdown, they could have widened the gap a little bit. They could have gotten a touchdown, didn't get one, got a stupid 15-yard penalty. Number 73, the offensive lineman, got an unsportsmanlike conduct on the 1-yard line. That goes back to coaching too. Undisciplined. This team is undisciplined. They got stupid penalties, multiple stupid penalties in the Orlando game, a game that was essentially do or die. Because even though they didn't know their fate right after the game, it was a do or die game basically. And the more points, the better. Like that game was all about scoring points. A 15-yard unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on the 1-yard line. Unacceptable. The guy should be kicked off the team for that. I'm sorry. Like that's just like, I don't even care. No excuses. You should be kicked off the team for that because that is a stupid move, stupid penalty. And then Anthony Becht trotted out Donnie Hageman, who at least would have gotten 3 points. He missed the field goal, of course. Donnie Hageman. And I had said the week before, hey, the story of the season for the Battlehawks might be Donnie Hageman's turnaround because he was like money since being like terrible in the first 2 games. And then, of course, he misses basically the most important field goal of the season.
Cairo Santos is a free agent, just saying.
I'll take anybody. But Becht, I just did not like the game management. Again, great locker room guy. I didn't like the game management.
I think you're giving him too much credit when it comes to the locker room. I'm being real. Like,
I don't think so because like even going back to their first 2 games that they won in like thrilling fashion, like it takes some level of like coaching to make something like that happen. So I give him a little bit of credit for that, and I do think the players like him, and he's a steady presence. But I just didn't really like him as a football coach. And again, what does Becht bring to the table? Because we talked about his resume when he first got hired. He was a tight ends coach for the AAF, and he was a high school football coach. That's it as far as coaching experience. And then you have these other teams like the Defenders, like the Sea Dragons that have legit coach, like Greg Williams, who was a really good defensive coordinator in the NFL for many, many years, is on the DC coaching staff, and he's not even the head coach. We have a guy that basically has 0 head coaching experience as the head coach, no NFL coaching experience. Like, what has Becht done? What did Becht do to deserve the job? But I never got to finish my statement from earlier, which was the Battlehawks screwed themselves over as well against Orlando because they allowed so many points. They allowed Orlando to score 28 points. I know one of those touchdowns for Orlando was on special teams. I get that, but even then, okay, they scored 20 points. They've only done that. I think they only scored. It was like in 6 games, which is a lot actually, considering the length of the season. But still, Orlando was really bad. we think the Battlehawks were one of the better teams this year. It shouldn't be asking too much to hold Orlando under 20 points, and they just couldn't do that.
Oh, I just realized. Josh, do you happen to know what coach made the playoffs?
Give me a team.
Arlington.
Chuck Chuck Long and Jonathan Hayes are in the playoffs.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Chuck Long is competing. No, Chuck Long, Jonathan Hayes, and Jordan Teamu are all competing. Oh, and Taylor Russolino and Marquette King are all competing for an XFL championship. And we're not.
Bring back Jay Hayes.
What? Okay. I think it's very clear that, like, they're not going to move on from Becht because, like...
No, they're not.
I mentioned it earlier I kind of started to talk about, like, this fan base. Like, you can't really evaluate them like any other fan base. Like, maybe it's the same group of, like, Cardinals fans, because I know Cardinals fans are very, like, happy-go-lucky, like, everything's going to be fine. Like, Marmel's a fine manager. Aren't they, like, fine with everything going on, and they're saying everything's going to be okay?
They're eternal optimists, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's the same people, because, like, the weird, like, defense when I'll tweet, like, fire Becht on Twitter or something like that, and I just get, like, hit with a wave of people defending him, like, what, are you crazy? When we went 70-3, he was a rookie head coach, you don't know football. And it's like, okay, well, realistically, this team should have been 9-1, like, straight up. That's the talent level. This team should have been 9-1, maybe 8-2 at the worst, but, like, and they should have won by a lot wider margin than they did a lot of the time, because you can compare them to the Steelers in a lot of the ways, where, like, they just got bailed out by their high-end talent despite not being very good. That felt like the story of the Battlehawks week in and week out. And these fans don't seem to realize it. And I assume that the reason why Battlehawks fans are so loyal to Anthony Becht is that he represents bringing the team back. He is the face of the team and who they associate with having football back in St. Louis. And I kind of get that, but their loyalty should be to the team and not to the coach. Like, you can like the Battlehawks and think that they need a new coach. And I feel like our only hope is, because, like, the only way that we can really tell how this offseason is going to go is from comparing it to the USFL offseason. And, like, half the USFL coaches resigned for, like, one reason or another. Like Jeff Fisher, St. Louis legend, resigned from head coach of the Michigan Panthers, and they got a new coach.
We're using the term legend real loosely on here.
So I feel like there's a solid chance that Becht might resign to go do something else. But like you talked about, there's a very real chance Greg Williams gets another opportunity somewhere else. Very real chance Wade Phillips gets an opportunity somewhere else, and they resign for that reason or whatever. Who's going to come knocking at the door for Anthony Becht? The only thing that I could think of is, like, if he wants to focus on, like, his son's high school football team or something like that. Like, I just have to pray that there's a reason that he can't do this anymore.
He's going to go be the Chiefs. He's going to be a Chiefs assistant.
Chiefs tight end coach. Honestly, I would take Anthony Becht as the Chiefs tight end coach if it meant the Battlehawks got a new head coach. Like, if the deal was Greg Williams becomes head coach of the St. Louis Battlehawks, but Anthony Becht becomes the Chiefs tight end coach, deal. I would gladly do that.
Yeah, because Becht isn't going to teach Kelsey anything.
Yeah, like, what's Becht going to tell Kelsey to do? Like, and maybe Becht can actually coach tight ends. I don't know. He coached Gavin Escobar in the AAF, so do with that what you will. But, like, maybe he's good at that. But Lord knows he's not a good head coach. Maybe you could even say he's a good GM, because he did draft this team. And So you could even argue that. But he is a dog shit head coach, and just gives me so many Nathaniel Hackett, Mike McCarthy vibes when I see him on the sideline. And I please Beck to resign. I'm fully planning on starting a cyberbully campaign to convince him not to come back. But God, we need a new fucking coach, dude.
The other concern I have beyond Anthony Beck now is that since St. Louis didn't make the playoffs, it felt like this was as good of a year as ever. Like St. Louis lucked into having a pretty good team in XFL 2020. That was awesome. They got a pretty decent team again this time. And even though they weren't able to get Jordan Tamu back, who was beloved and he was a great quarterback last time, was in the running for XFL MVP during 2020. They got AJ McCarron, who might have been even better. And like I praised the wide receiver core earlier, Hakeem Butler, Darius Shepard, all those guys. There's going to be some of these players that the NFL does come back to them and they get another shot. Like Hakeem Butler.
Hakeem Butler and Darius Shepard are going to be in the NFL this season.
Well, they talked about that on the broadcast because there were scouts at the game, and the broadcasters were talking about how they asked them about. I think it was the sideline reporter said that both the scouts at the game specifically mentioned Darius Shepard as a guy they're looking at to be a returner again in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and going back to the USFL comparison, we just saw Cavante Turpin never sniffed the NFL, won USFL MVP, and then was a Pro Bowl returner for the Cowboys. So the return game is very, or how do I phrase this? The return game from spring ball translates very well to the NFL. So it would make sense that Darius Shepard is the go-to guy. They're trying to replicate the Cowboys' success with Turpin.
Yeah, but anyway, like Hakeem Butler, there's a good chance that he's not here next year. Travis Feeney on the defense. Like I wouldn't be surprised if the NFL circled back around to Travis Feeney. He was really good this year for the Battlehawks, anchor of the defense. So this felt like as good of a year as ever, and they couldn't get it done.
I wouldn't worry about that too much because the same logic applies to the rest of the league. Like the top players are going to get picked from the league. And again, I keep bringing up the USFL, but like the Stallions are still as good as they were last year. And for the most part, the good teams from last year, with the exception of the Michigan Panthers, are good now. Everyone else is kind of the same. But there were losses to the NFL like Cavante Turpin. But a lot of guys, there was a large portion of guys that left for the NFL, got cut, and came back. So I wouldn't be shocked if like Hakeem Butler leaves for, say, the Chiefs, and then is a preseason casualty, and then he comes back. I wouldn't be shocked for that at all. Like that, I mean, we saw Jordan Ta'amu get cut by the Chiefs, go to the USFL, and then back to the XFL.
But then the concern is, would they be on the Battlehawks again?
I think they would because they're open free agents.
It's certainly not a guarantee, though.
It's not, but they're open free agents. Oh, yes. Yes, it is, actually, because that has already happened. After the XFL draft happened, the Defenders selected De'Aaron King. De'Aaron King was signed to the Panthers practice squad and then cut before the end of the season and then went back to the Defenders. And because the way the XFL works is they have a reserve list similar to the injured reserve list. That's when a player signs with another league, that XFL team retains their rights. But
for how long?
I mean, probably indefinitely. Because I know that's how it works in the CFL. The CFL will draft players that have no intention of ever playing in the NFL, or no intention of ever playing in the CFL. Like fucking Lamar Jackson got drafted into the CFL. And the way it works is just like, if there was ever a scenario where Lamar were to end up in the CFL for one reason or another, that specific team would have his rights. So I think the way it would work, just from knowing how these other spring leagues work, it would be like Hakeem Butler, if he were to come back to the XFL, would be a Battlehawk unless they cut him or traded him or something like that, which I guess he could like request a release or something like that, and they'd probably grant it. But if he wanted to come back and they wanted him back, he'd be back. So I'm not too worried about that. And I also feel like any future players that want to play in the XFL, St. Louis is going to be a desirable destination just because we've talked about it a million times. Like, players are going to want to play in front of this crowd. It's just more fun to play in front of to play when you have a crowd like that backing you. So Houston and stuff are going to be destinations because players are going to want to go play with under Wade Phillips and stuff like that. So a lot of good defensive players would probably go to Houston. But I think overall, the Battlehawks will remain a pretty solid free agency destination as we go further. But this is all just pure speculation. We don't know how this is going to work. We don't know how the XFL draft, which I assume there's going to be an XFL draft, is going to work, because like I keep using the USFL as a reference point, but the way they did it is they had a draft based off of the last year's standings, but it was to guys who are either going to be late round picks or undrafted guys in the upcoming NFL draft. Like, the big name that comes to mind is Lindsey Scott. Lindsey Scott's a quarterback that spent like a decade in college football, was really good, but he's not going to the NFL. But that's a good draft pick for the USFL. But they also had a plethora of players that just kind of picked a team and signed seemingly at random. Like, Reuben Foster is a newcomer to the USFL. He signed with the Pittsburgh Maulers. Corey Coleman, Chiefs legend, signed with the Philadelphia Stars, and McLeod Bethel Thompson, from a longtime CFL quarterback, signed with the New Orleans Breakers just because they had an opening at quarterback. So if it works like the XFL does, the Battlehawks will essentially just be recruiting at that point.
Why couldn't we have just made the playoffs? Actually, I'm glad the season's over. I'm just going to say it. I'm glad the season's over, so I don't have to stress about this anymore. I had football fatigue anyway.
Okay, Josh.
Go watch the Red Sox lose.
I had football fatigue, man. I was ready. There's just too many other sports going on. I got the Celtics playoffs to watch. I didn't need the Battlehawks getting in the way of that.
You have the Deadbirds
in the postseason. No, I don't have the Deadbirds. You had the Deadbirds. I just happened to host a podcast that you're on where we talk about the Deadbirds.
Speaking of the Deadbirds,
watch that.
No, we're not transitioning this into a 2-hour special where we're talking about the Deadbirds.
This is your St. Louis Sports Spectacular, where we talk Battlehawks football, Cardinals baseball, and Blues hockey.
We're talking about the Deadbirds.
There's nothing to talk about with the Blues.
But I mean, I don't know. I feel like we kind of talked about everything because
this was we talked about this last night. Another thing about the league that just kind of pisses me off is the broadcasting with like how Colorado, they had fucking Kirk Herbstreit commentating that. And it's like, why the hell do we have ESPN's E-team commentating the Battlehawks game? Like, why aren't we having like big name commentators do this? Because that adds another level of legitimacy to the league. Exactly.
Yeah, they
like give the league more legitimacy with who's calling it.
That's what goes on in the USFL. They're actually on real channels instead of ESPN3.
Yeah. Well, so we'll actually touch on this before we kind of wrap it up, but talking because it's going to be a while, so we talk about XFL again, really, since the Battlehawks are out of it. But
we'll probably have some news that warrants an episode before next season.
Sure, but
we'll do a season preview.
But what I was going to say is that the TV numbers actually spiked back up in the second half of the season for the XFL, which was really good to see because there was a point there where we're like, these TV numbers are bad. Like the novelty wore off again. Like this does not look good. And they went back up again to respectable numbers. They hovered around 6, 7, 800,000. There was a couple more games that hit 1 million again in the second half of the season. So TV numbers were all right. Now attendance league wide, something that this league is going to have to work on. But despite the lackluster marketing efforts, I feel like they did okay on TV.
Yeah.
I will say
we'll have to see how the playoffs and the championship goes. But overall, if I'm grading how well the XFL did year one from a terms of just marketing and getting their product out there, I think to like a general audience, I think that the XFL is more widely known about than the USFL just because of St. Louis. And like the Battlehawks have like really taken the football world by storm. Whereas the USFL, it seems like it is just like a niche community of spring people who love spring football. And that's not like more widely
Like
accessible
Connor.
to the, like Connor. But overall, if I'm, like I said, if I'm grading the XFL year one, I'm probably giving them like a C plus at best on how good of a job they did, only because of St. Louis. And I think that adding San Antonio was good, and because they had such a strong second half. Now, again, let's just see how everything goes with the playoffs and the championship. And I'm assuming we'll get a season 2, especially since there
we
are.
will.
Well, they
Danny
already came
Garcia
out and
announced
said,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they already came out and said there's going to be a second season.
But like, I feel like my grade for this season, because I've been I might make a video on my YouTube channel just
Connor's
breaking
content.
what?
Connor's gonna make content.
Yeah, I mean, this is
he says.
This is my niche market. This is where I thrive. This is my domain, okay? Nobody else knows this shit like I do. Anyway, but I might make a video like saying what the XFL needs to change or something like that, because you're right, the TV numbers did spike back up, but I'm still kind of nervous. I feel like a merger is inevitable, right? Because there are some things that the XFL does really well, but there are some things where the USFL just whoops their ass. Like, you talked about the solid TV numbers for the XFL. The USFL is on actual channels like Fox and NBC, which is a major boost for them.
Well, the XFL still had some games on major networks.
Right, but the majority of them were like on ESPN Plus, which is not viable. But I still feel like a merger is inevitable. Player or figures from both sides have talked about it. Most notably, Jamar Smith wants to play the XFL champion. So it just feels inevitable. But if the biggest thing that gave me hope for the USFL is they learned from year one, because I was furious at the cities they chose. But going into year two, they relocated a team after year one. And I know with them, relocation is a loose term, but they added another non-NFL market after year one, and 2 if you want to count Canton. But they added that after year one, and that was huge. And I feel like the XFL has to do that. Like, I know they already said they're going back to Cashman Field, but you can't do that, dude. Like, you just can't. Like, if the XFL is playing in Vegas again and they didn't change anything after year one, the league is you fucked up. And I think it might be a little different because they're locked into like stadium deals and stuff like that, whereas the USFL only had one stadium deal. But still, like, I'm sure
there has to be a way to get out of that.
Yeah, like there's some like legal jargon, like even if you just have to like buy out your contract with fucking Cashman Field. They did that at the last minute anyway. We were like 3 weeks from the start of the season and we didn't know where Vegas was going to play. So if you can like get out of that and put the Vipers in like San Diego or something like that, you have to do it.
Well, shit. I mean, Yeah, because now that you're mentioning all this stuff, it makes me remember how unprepared the XFL really was, because I remember there was only like 50 days until the season, and they still weren't selling season tickets yet. They weren't even selling tickets at all.
They
They
didn't
weren't
have the
selling-
schedule announced.
They weren't selling jerseys until like 2 weeks ago.
Or that's what it was. There was no schedule, and people are like, how am I supposed to get season tickets when I don't even know if I can actually go to the games? Because you won't tell us when the games are, when the season is less than 2 months away.
And the scheduling was awful, because like I remember it was like the second San Antonio game and the attendance sucked, and I'm like, that's really weird. San Antonio
He muted.
I was on a roll too, but I'm like, San Antonio is usually really good at this. And I just happened to check and see that there was a Spurs game that night. And it's
And the second Battlehawks game, we talked about it then. There's a fucking Kraken game going on at like right across the city. It's like, what are you doing?
Specifically mentioning that game, that was a Seattle game, and the part of the reason attendance sucked is because it was so damn cold. But like, you have teams that play in domes in San Antonio, in St. Louis, and you have teams
go to Orlando.
Yeah, that's another thing. You played early season games when it was cold in Seattle, and late season games when it was hot as shit in Orlando. Why? Just schedule Orlando earlier in the year and Seattle later in the year for a more comfortable temperature for your fans. How do you not do that? And also, you need to have the awareness to schedule your games around the other games going on in those cities. Not only could you imagine the fucking Battlehawks traffic if they screwed up and did schedule it at the same time as a Cardinals game?
That would be so fucking bad, because I mean, knowing how to drive downtown St. Louis, it's a fucking mess. But leaving the Battlehawks game, that wasn't too bad. Like, all things considered, even like there's 38,000 people there. We got out of there in a relatively quick time compared to getting out of a Cardinals game. Now, if you add getting out of a Cardinals game to what happened at the Battlehawks game, and they were happening like back to back, in a Battlehawks game ended and a Cardinals game was starting, you would be fucked. Like, people would be getting to their seats 30 minutes to an hour late.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And
I mean, luckily they didn't, but God forbid if it happens next year, like the league's that's malpractice.
You can't do that. What you have to do is, like, I think one of the things the league has to do, and maybe it's hard because there's one owner with The Rock. I think each team needs to have their own, like, chairman and owner, because, like, they need to be working with these.
Yeah, they need to get
teams.
BB a team.
They need to have, like, wouldn't it be cool if AJ McCarron threw the first pitch out at a Cardinals game and they had, like, some combination, or, like, that's a good way to sell tickets. Like, hey, buy this one pass that gets you a ticket to the Cardinals game and a ticket to the Battlehawks game the next day, or something like that. Like, have Hines Ward show up at Spurs games and stuff like that, or have Spurs night at the Brahmas game, or just something like that. Like, you need cross promotion to reach these sports teams. And like, the marketing for this league was just straight up bad. They were very reliant on people knowing what the XFL was. And like, even with St. Louis, it was a downward trend. Every home game had less people, but like, it never got below 33,000. So it still worked. It was still dwarfing the rest of the league. But I saw one stat that was like, if you take the 7 teams that aren't the Battlehawks, their average home attendance was 11,000. That's not sustainable. And how you solve that is by having Orlando and San Antonio be good and exploring new markets. Are you going to find markets that aren't viable? Yeah, but you're also going to hit gold and become the football team in other places. And I don't understand why that's so hard to figure out.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you. I think the USFL is kicking the XFL's ass in some areas, and they're doing it with a lot less resources because the XFL had significantly more financial backing than the USFL. They really did start from scratch, having all their games in Birmingham and that sort of thing. And then they were able to expand in their second season, add more cities to play in. And it doesn't really seem like
the
the XFL
branding of the teams for the most part is still stupid, but at least they learned and they didn't keep Tampa, and now they're branding them as Memphis. But
yeah, and it doesn't seem like the XFL is going to be doing that. It seems like we're going to be getting the Orlando Guardians again next year, and we're going to be getting the Vegas Vipers again next year, and those are teams that are going to be dragging this league down.
I think the best for everyone involved is a merger. Take what the USFL does best and what the XFL does best and form a sustainable spring league. Because I think the lesson to learn from XFL 2020, XFL 2023, both seasons of the USFL is it's obviously not going to be an NFL level league, but you can't deny that there's enough interest here for a spring league to survive. They can't give out multi-million-dollar contracts. They might not be on ABC every week, but there is enough interest here to survive. And that has to be.
I think an issue with a merger is going to be The Rock.
He's very arrogant with this.
He's extremely he's widely known in Hollywood as one of the most egotistical people. I think that is pretty apparent with his movies, Black Adam especially, and how he wanted Black Adam to be like the face of DC and all of this when the movie wasn't that good. But like The Rock is a very arrogant, very egotistical person who wants it to be all about him. So I'm not sure if he would be willing to merge with the USFL. Especially if it means that he takes a lesser role.
They were going to do the CFL thing. That was a very real thing. It was the whole reason we had to wait until 2023 to have the XFL again, is because they screwed around with the CFL trying to merge with them the first time. So it's not like they're unwilling to merge. They tried to do it once already with the CFL.
I will say, I wouldn't consider that completely dead. Just because it's a phrase I use a lot, desperation breeds ingenuity. And I'm not super well versed with the CFL, but I know a little bit. But I know things are going south up there. And in the past, when things
are going south up north, you had an opportunity to say that.
When things do go south for the CFL, they often turn to America. Because the CFL has added short-lived, admittedly, expansion teams in Baltimore, Memphis, and Birmingham before. So I think it is very realistic that at some point, The Rock, the CFL commissioner, and I don't even know who the head of the USFL is, if I'm being real. I think it's maybe Daryl Johnston or something.
Spring football fan.
I don't know. Let's just say Skip Holtz. The Rock, Skip Holtz, and Justin Trudeau walk into a bar and discuss a super spring league or something like that. I don't imagine it would be every team involved. I think it would just be the most successful teams. We'd probably see just the Toronto Argonauts, Las Vegas Vipers have horrible attendance, and half the USFL teams don't even have a home stadium. So I think they'd probably drop the bottom feeders. But if you took if you made an 8-team league made up of the Battlehawks, the Stallions, the top few teams from the CFL, and then the Memphis Showboats
and San Antonio.
Yeah, you got something there.
Mm-hmm. You take 4 teams from the CFL: St. Louis, San Antonio, Memphis, and Birmingham. Or hell, maybe even you take 6 or 10 or 6 or 8 teams from the CFL, and then you have a 12-team league.
Yeah, I think you could do that.
And then you could actually have, well, you could realistically have divisions.
Oh shit!
with that many
Okay,
teams.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this right now. So far for the 2022 season, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers had 28,000. The Saskatchewan Roughriders had 27,000. Edmonton 23, Calgary 23, Hamilton 22, BC 20, Ottawa 20, and then it drops off with 17, and Toronto in dead last with 11. So honestly, the CFL seems to be doing really well. So perhaps them telling The Rock to fuck off was a good decision. Because they're averaging double what the XFL is, but obviously St. Louis would still be number one in the CFL.
Mhm.
So honestly, fuck the XFL and just give St. Louis a CFL team at this point.
I just really
Josh
hope
was ready to wrap this up 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, I was.
But moral of the story, spring football works, and St. Louis deserves a football team.
It works if there's not a complete idiot running the league.
Which I think The Rock is definitely. I also question how much of your issues come from The Rock and how much come from Danny Garcia, because I feel like The Rock, The Rock's fingerprints are very clearly there. Like the name Brahmas, Dwayne very definitely.
No. His baby Brahmas.
The baby Brahmas, that was very clearly The Rock's doing. And then I feel like Dwayne. And then it was apparent with the fact that Terramana and what's his other company? Zoa. Terramana and Zoa were very present, and the fact that it was his clothing brand doing the uniforms.
Wait, Connor, what energy drink did you get when
that was Zoa.
Okay.
It's the energy drink of the XFL.
But just like The Rock having...
They taste like shit, by the way.
I drank one on the way home from the Battlehawks game.
They're not good.
But just like the fact that it's his brands and one of his teams pushing for it, it very clearly... those were very clearly his fingerprints. And
another reason why he's an egotistical... Just... Yeah.
Well, did you see what the jerseys you could buy were? There were 2 jerseys available for each team. A number 23, just generic jersey, or you could buy a jersey that was number 54 and had D. Johnson on the back of it.
Those were the only jerseys that you could buy?
Yes.
Jesus.
Which is fucking stupid. Sell jerseys of actual players.
Mm-hmm.
And why did it take so long to produce Dwayne Johnson jerseys? It'd be one thing if they were waiting to see what players became the faces of the teams and stuff like that, to see how good AJ McCarron was or something like that, and they just wanted to pick the best player or let me rephrase, the most marketable player from each team. That would have been one thing. But to wait that long to produce Dwayne Johnson jerseys is fucking stupid. And then he also did his whole player 54 thing where it's oh man, I was always number 54. Dwayne, you're good, but you're not good enough. Dwayne, no, you weren't. You had got no NFL looks, and you got cut for stealing from the Ottawa Red Blacks. You had 0 shot at going to the NFL. So he sits there and he very much overrates himself with that. And I think the entire, I think his investment of it is very much an ego stroke thing. And I feel like the real mastermind behind this is Danny Garcia, because...
No, it's BB.
Because Danny,
Don't need
being
to get
his
her on here.
Danny was the one that convinced him to do it. Danny called him up and said, hey, let's do this. And Danny sold him on the idea of giving these kids an opportunity and stuff like that. But Danny, I feel, might be the bigger issue with her being very, she takes a very staunch feminist stance for some reason, which is odd for a football league. And you can see that with the marketing, like, this is a league for him and her. Danny
Yeah,
Garcia
because
is the
they made, like, in that broadcast again, which we were talking about earlier, they made it very apparent to point out multiple times how there is a woman on every single referee staff.
yeah, no wonder there's so many missed calls. But the point is, like, you talk about the Rock's ego, Danny has as equal of an ego.
Yeah, they both screwed over BB. BB
But,
should be the one running this league.
but
No one even knows who that is.
Don't care.
I think there is a scenario where you could convince The Rock to merge with the USFL, at least for like, whenever mergers are talked about, I always related to the AFL NFL merger because that's what I'm most familiar with. And like initially, the only merge between the two was the Super Bowl. They played the first 4 Super Bowls, and then it really became one league. So maybe you could just do something like that. Have the spring bowl between the Stallions and the Roughnecks to determine the ultimate spring football champion, or just something like that, you know.
Uh-huh.
But and I think it's kind of an adapt or die situation. Like, do you want to succeed or not? Like, eventually you're going to. I think I don't know, Braden. You and I are the only ones here that have been to both an XFL and USFL game.
Yeah.
And I know you don't obviously don't pay as much attention to the USFL, but like,
Nope.
what do you, just from your experience, I would wager and say the XFL has a better in-person product, but the USFL is the better on TV product. How would you feel about that statement?
I think that the USFL is pretty close in its on-field, or it's like in stadium experience because the XFL didn't have a kid licking a balloon for 30 minutes. Yeah, that was a fun story from the USFL championship. But no, I think that that's pretty heavily influenced by us obviously going to a St. Louis game. So, I mean, St. Louis is by far the best spring football end game experience that you're going to get with the crowd. Like no other place is going to compare to that. And I think that because the USFL is still doing that host city shit, which I find extremely unattractive, like they're in like the fan attendance and interaction with everything is still just kind of like but yeah, like watching in a USFL game versus an XFL game, like you said, I don't pay that much attention to the USFL. I mean, I know what's going on and I keep up with the scores, and if I'm not busy, I'll watch the games on a weekend. But like my favorite league's the XFL just because of the Battlehawks and because of like I guess you could call it nostalgia for the 2020 season. But the USFL definitely does do things right, and they do things better in a lot of ways. And they're definitely a lot smarter about what they're doing, especially like while I don't like the host cities, it's smart for a startup and how they're doing it.
And they certainly picked the right host city with
Yeah.
Birmingham last year.
Oh, yeah.
And the XFL did do their host city thing to an extent where everyone lives in Dallas but just flies to the respective cities. Like the Battlehawks players, which I think is a travesty because the Battlehawks players don't live in St. Louis. They live in Dallas, but they just fly to St. Louis for the quote unquote home games. And like
Which
that
seems like a waste of airplane.
that seems like malpractice
Expenses.
because like I think it'd be great to see like Battlehawks like I say community involvement is overrated for like NFL teams and stuff like that, but Battlehawks community involvement would be a great thing. Josh, I know you went to a Battlehawks like community involvement event at I think it was a Dick's where Teamu Hayes and Kenny Robinson signed autographs or something.
Yep.
Yeah, like having your host city be Dallas prevents you from doing that.
Yeah.
And so it makes zero sense for the XFL to have chosen Dallas as that.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be rare, but I think you could see players like AJ McCarron or just like those big names of those franchises, because I have a pretty good suspicion that McCarron's going to be back next season.
Oh, yeah.
And for as long as the XFL is around, I think McCarron is going to want to be the Battlehawks quarterback. And I think that you might see players like him buy a house and like legitimately just settle down and live in St. Louis.
Which would be great.
Yeah.
He'd
So
never have
if
to buy a
like
deal
the
there.
XFL could just like provide that sense of stability there, then yeah, I think that you would have more community involvement. But
Yeah, he'd never have to buy a meal in St. Louis, that's for sure.
Oh, no. And, like, that's another thing. Like, if, I don't know, Brandon Silvers goes out to a bar in Houston, people are going to be like, who? And then they'll go back to watching the Astros game. But, like, if AJ McCarron walked into a bar in Ballpark Village or something like that, everyone's going to know who he is. And that's just what makes it special here, you know?
For sure. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. We've been going for an hour. I'm done with the Battlehawks.
All right, time to start the second hour of Dead's Birds discussion.
And we'll see you all in the next one.